Imagine this. For 13 straight days in October 1962, the entire world was teetering on the edge of, well, total annihilation, nuclear war. It sounds like something out of a movie, but it was terrifyingly real. So today, we're going to look at how we got there, and maybe more importantly, how we managed to step back. And yeah, the world literally held its breath. This wasn't just some abstract political game being played by men in suits. No, this was real, gut-wrenching fear. You had families huddled around their radios, honestly wondering if they were going to see the next day. The air was just thick with a kind of tension the world had never felt before. And get this, 103 miles. That's it. That's the distance from Cuba to Florida. So for the United States, this wasn't some far-off threat on the other side of the globe. Nope. We're talking nuclear weapons sitting right on their doorstep. It made the whole thing feel incredibly personal and incredibly urgent. So, that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth did two global superpowers get us so close to the edge? And maybe even more fascinating, how did they manage to walk it back? That's what we're going to unpack. The causes, the high-stakes drama, and the nail-biting negotiations that, well, saved the world. All right, so let's get into it. The whole thing kicked off not with a bang, but with a secret, a really big one. It all started with a discovery that sent absolute shockwaves through the White House and basically triggered a state of emergency overnight. So you have these American spy planes flying way, way up over Cuba, and they snap these photos. When the analysts got a look at them, their blood must have run cold, because what they saw was undeniable. The Soviets were secretly and very quickly building launch sites for nuclear missiles. And this really gets to the heart of the threat. We're not just talking about some distant military base. We are talking about missiles that could hit major American cities, Washington, D.C., New York, in a matter of minutes. For President Kennedy and his team, this wasn't just another political headache. It was a direct threat to the nation's survival. There was no way they were just going to let this happen. Okay, but wait, how did we even get here? I mean, this didn't just happen out of the blue. To really get it, we need to hit rewind for a minute and look at the backstory that led to this whole mess. So the backdrop for all of this is, of course, the Cold War. For years, the USA and the USSR were locked in this incredibly tense standoff. It wasn't a hot war with battles, but a cold one. Both sides were just stockpiling an insane amount of nuclear weapons. The whole idea was this terrifying balancing act where one wrong move could mean the end of everything. And the road to this crisis was paved pretty quickly. First, in 1959, you have Fidel Castro taking over Cuba, creating a pro-Soviet government right on America's doorstep. Then in 61, the US tries to overthrow him with the whole Bay of Pigs invasion, which fails big time. And all that does is push Castro even deeper into the Soviets' arms. So, naturally, when the USSR comes along and offers him nuclear missiles for protection, Castro says, "You bet." So, the second those missiles were discovered, a clock starts ticking, a very, very loud clock. And for the next 13 days, the world's fate basically rested on the shoulders of the men inside the White House. Every single decision was critical. What does Kennedy do? He immediately pulls together his top advisors, this core group they called XCOM. And these guys met around the clock, in total secrecy. They were debating, they were arguing, just trying to figure a way out of this impossible mess. And all the while, Kennedy's getting intense pressure from his generals, who are basically screaming for a military strike. Basically, they had two main paths forward, and honestly, both were terrible. Option A was go in hot, a massive military strike to just wipe out the missile sites. The huge risk there, it could instantly trigger an all-out nuclear war. Option B was a naval blockade to stop any more Soviet ships from getting to Cuba. It's less aggressive, but it might not work, and it could make Kennedy look weak on the world stage. What a choice, right? Ultimately, Kennedy went with the blockade. He called it a quarantine to sound a little less aggressive, but everyone knew what it was. It was a clear line in the sand, it sent a strong message for sure, but it was also designed to buy time, to leave the door open for negotiation instead of just jumping straight into war. And then the whole world just watched and waited as Soviet ships sailed right towards that American blockade line. Okay, so the blockade is up and tensions are just sky high. Now the real work starts. Forget the public posturing. Behind the scenes, things were frantic. We're talking secret back-channel messages flying between Washington and Moscow as both sides desperately tried to hammer out some kind of deal to stop the world from blowing up. So here's the deal they finally landed on. It had 3 parts. Step 1, the Soviets agree to pull their missiles out of Cuba. Okay, simple enough. Step 2, the U.S. publicly promises they will never invade Cuba. But then there was Step 3, the secret part, the real key to the whole thing. The U.S. also secretly agreed to remove its own nuclear missiles from Turkey. This was a huge deal, because it gave the Soviet leader, Khrushchev, a way to save face. And just like that, it was over. You can almost hear the entire planet letting out a collective sigh of relief. But coming that close to the end of the world, that leaves a mark. It fundamentally changed things for both the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and really for the rest of the Cold War. You know, staring into the abyss like that really was a terrifying wake-up call for both superpowers. I think both Washington and Moscow looked at each other and realized we can never, ever let things get this out of hand again. The absolute horror of those 13 days made it crystal clear they needed a better way to talk to each other. And that led to one of the most famous results of the crisis, the hotline. Now, it wasn't actually a big red phone like in the movies, which is kind of disappointing. It was a secure teletype machine. But the point was, for the very first time, the leaders in the White House and the Kremlin could talk to each other directly and instantly if a crisis flared up. A simple idea, but absolutely revolutionary. So the crisis ended, but the weapons are still here. The lessons from those 13 days feel more important now than ever, right? It showed us just how crucial clear communication and diplomacy are when you're facing the unthinkable. And it leaves us with a pretty big question today. In a world that's still full of nuclear weapons, how do we make sure we remember the lessons of 1962 the next time we find ourselves on the brink?